All right, good morning, happy Monday. Welcome to the Cannabis Minority Report podcast here at NCIA, the National Cannabis Industry Association. We've got a great episode here today. Really excited for our guest today, the conversation we're going to have. Kay Villamin, co-founder of HUSH Chicago. I'll do the proper intro in a minute, but it's going to be a great conversation. First, I got some news stories to jump off with, a couple announcements from the NCAA, and then we'll cover the national and a couple local news stories as well. So getting started, the first thing we're going to talk about today is a couple announcements from the NCAA. First thing, if you are in Denver or the Denver area, we have our Colorado caucus is this Wednesday. It was rescheduled from last month due to a snowstorm. So this Wednesday, we are ready to roll. I believe the governor will be in-house and giving some statements and telling folks, basically what's up, what's going on with Colorado cannabis. In addition to that, we also have the equity workshop tour coming up, and that is going to be at the end of April to the beginning of May. We're looking at April 29th or 30th, still tentative, in New York City. And then we are going to be in Chicago on May 6th and Detroit the following day on May 7th. So it'll be a great week of equity workshops on the East Coast and in the Midwest. And really looking forward to seeing some of you out there. So definitely let us know if you'll be attending and which city you'll be attending and what capacity you'd like to participate in. So, all right, with that said, let's jump right into the news today. So a few different stories. And Kay, welcome to the show, first of all. You're welcome to chime in on any of the news stories that you feel like speaking on. If nothing really strikes your fancy, it's totally fine too. And like I said, I'll give you a proper introduction in just a little bit, aside from just, of course, stating that you're the co-founder of HUSH and you're also the new chair of our state regs committee. So that said, the news. All right. The first news story I want to talk about today is Hawaii has been making headlines in cannabis. And I saw this story in MJ Biz Daily the other day. Hawaii, Delaware adult use marijuana legalization outlook rosy after the Oklahoma failure. The governor apparently is ready to sign a bill into law whenever that bill reaches their desk, if it passes, and it has already passed the Hawaii Senate last week by a 22-3 vote. So pretty overwhelming support there. This is from the story. If approved, Senate Bill 669 would set up a state authority to oversee an adult use industry, allow adults 21 and older to possess up to 30 grams of marijuana and cultivate up to 6 plants. Mind you, medical does exist in the state of Hawaii. It's very limited. There's only 8 dispensaries right now, to my understanding, or 8 companies. They're all vertically integrated. So this is for adult use, by the way. This bill would also expunge certain marijuana-related offenses, and existing medical licensees would be able to convert to adult use. So that said, I was also contacted by M4MM's Hawaii State Director, May Fu, and I don't know if I'm going to get this correct last name, but May Fuimaono Poe, a family nurse practitioner who in 2016 opened the first nurse-led cannabis clinic in Hawaii and has been a strong advocate for indigenous native rights of Hawaii in the cannabis industry, the legacy rights and patient rights for the last several years. And so so May and a colleague of hers, they contacted me last week also actually asking for support on what they're working on. And so something I wanted to excerpt from their story that they sent me over is that the same Senate bill we're talking about here, 669, would allow only the 8 licensees to sell recreational cannabis for at least 2 years while the state figures out how to establish a functional market, giving the dispensaries the ability to basically block any of the legacy growers from ever coming to market. Possession of more than an ounce would still be punishable by law, and the new bill basically would be a detriment to the cannabis heritage of Hawaii, and the cultivators that currently exist in the medical space. Now, I haven't looked into the story any further than this, just basically what I saw from Biz Daily, as well as what I received from May. But what I do know is that we've seen similar types of things happen in multiple states. And one of the issues that we really like to chime in on, and this is something that the MCBA, Minority Cannabis Business Association, had highlighted in their recent report that they released last year, was that one of the big detriments to social equity and legacy in this space in a state that converts to adult use is when they basically allow for the medical licensees to be the first ones to market with the adult use And oftentimes, like in Illinois, for example, that goes on for a couple of years at least before we do see the new so-called social equity licensees being able to participate in the marketplace. So, without knowing anything further, what I will say is that oftentimes these bills, nothing happens for many years, then all of a sudden we see them pushed right through, and then equity is really an afterthought at the end of the day. So, if we really do want to see equity in Hawaii, my guess here, or my advocacy here, would be let's take a step back and see what we can find out and see how we can support each other in creating a more equitable industry. So I'm looking forward to talking with May as well as anybody else in Hawaii. I know we have a couple contacts there that do work directly with some of the licensees. Not trying to, throw too much shade on the licensees. I don't know them personally or anything like that, but I do know that in states with limited licenses, it can be really challenging for the legacy folks and the folks that have been holding down a lot of the more caretaker space on the medical side. It really makes it challenging for them. So more to come on that as we find out more about what's going on in Hawaii. Obviously, it's just a small state, but I think it's a really important state because it's so steeped in cannabis culture and tradition, and a lot of tourism also of not just Americans, but people from all over the world. So with that said, I know, Kay, you've seen similar things in Illinois, I'm sure, over the last couple of years. I don't know if you want to comment here or not, but feel free before we jump into our next story here. Yeah,
Yeah,
anything
sure.
to comment on? Yeah, sure. All right.
I think, any news that is regarding legalization of a new state is great news. I like the slow approach that they're taking. Um, Also, just curious to see how things will roll out, just like with any other new state. What I'm super curious about is how they will allow for marketing and advertising in Hawaii, because I already know it's very limited in general to begin with. So I think that will be very, very interesting to look out for, especially coming from the space that we're in with marketing and just advertising it. I think it'll be really interesting to see how Hawaii puts down those regulations on what cannabis companies will be allowed to do, considering a lot of regular companies can't do just the traditional advertising out there. So I'm very curious about that.
Awesome. No, thanks for that perspective. Yeah, the marketing side of it, and a lot of people don't realize, but the marketing side of it is highly restricted in the cannabis industry. Not just social media, but all types of media, all types of marketing. So, absolutely, great point. All right, so quick story here, just something to note is Revelry. The Revelry Conference, hosted by On the Revel, took place on February 25th, 2023. That's just a couple weeks ago at the City Tech Theater in downtown Brooklyn, New York. And so this is from Beer Brothers. I found this story here. The conference brought together the leading voices and brands from New York's legacy cannabis industry to provide attendees with street level insights and the opportunity to connect with like minded individuals. The full day immersive experience features more than 16 signature panels, 25 plus vendors, and over 750 attendees. A quote from one of the attendees was, "As a patron of the conference for the last several years, it's great to see the consistency and quality of the event remain the same despite the expanded audience that legalization brought to the event this year." While some purists scoffed at the inclusion of corporate players in a conference that billed itself as for legacy operators, the fact is businesses are run on dollars and information, two things the recent Revelry conference successfully brought together. So that's from the story. A couple things I'll add is that, in conversations I've had with a couple of the different founders of On the Revel, these folks really do, I would say, bring the spirit of the legacy space, bring the spirit of the plant, of cannabis culture directly into this industry, right? Doing it the right way, I would say. The folks that we have heard from that attended this conference had a great time. They said that it was just, like kind of like when you think about some of the cannabis events over the years that have maybe been a little bit smaller. Some like for example, a cannabis industry social at the NCIA. The intimacy, the ability to network, the ability to connect with one another. And these folks are able to do this at a scale of 750. Of course, that's still small in the sense of, BizCon or some of the bigger conferences that are thousands and thousands of people. But 750 people is no small amount. And in a state like New York, I think it's extremely important that we see a conference that's legacy focused that also didn't just pop out of nowhere, that has been at it for several years. On the Revel, they've been working in the space for a long time, bringing the culture together, bringing people together, bringing the information out there, and making sure people are aware of their rights and what's going on in the space. and providing that space for legacy to be able to integrate into the new so-called corporate cannabis world. So just wanted to throw some highlights there, and just bring some spotlight on what Revelry is doing, because I think that it's something that we could all really, at the end of the day, learn from. And I'd love to see this in every single state, because we need to see the legacy space and the regulated space be integrated together, not so at odds with one another. So that's my statement on there. And then the last story here, which is one coming from Chicago. So, Kay, I'm wondering if you have any insights on this one. But Dr. Milo Marshall, a recent guest on the show here, is the editor of Cannabis Corner in Chicago for Chicago News Weekly, which is I believe it's a Black women-owned publication in Chicago that launched recently. And so she wrote a story this last week. Craft grower licenses have been issued. And we know that already sorry, I was going to say Colorado, in Illinois. 2021 there was a round, in 2022 there was a round. There was a deadline placed on when they had to be operational, and that deadline was basically now, I believe this month. So the deadline was extended to next year, February for those that were issued their licenses in 2021, and the end of the year for those that were issued their licenses in 2022. The deadline to get operational is really important here to note, because these are craft grows. There's not a lot of money flowing into the space for startup craft grows. Only 11 out of 85 in the first place have even received their construction permits. And so it's going to be interesting to see now, like, okay, look, Illinois came out and said, hey, we care about equity. Let's go ahead and get these licenses going. So they got these craft grow licenses. It took about 2 to 3 years, it looks like now, to get these things up and running in the first place. Not up and running, to get them issued in the first place. There's not a lot of funding available. The capital market has dried up. There's not a lot of help or support from the state at the end of the day for these types of initiatives. There is some, don't get me wrong. Illinois has done a little bit more reinvesting in some places. But in that same story, we also see that, for example, the tax dollars for cannabis that in Evanston are being used for reparations programs there. In Chicago, it's still pretty ambiguous and vague as far as what the money from the tax revenue there is going towards. Is it going towards supporting these operators, figuring out how to get up and operational in time, so that in the summer, when their $40,000 license renewal fees are due, they have a game plan and they're not just throwing $40,000 in, hoping that they can be operational 7 months later. So I know I just said a lot. There's a lot of different things to unpack here. We're obviously not going to get into all these bits and pieces here today, but the main gist of what I'm throwing out here is that, look, we just need to keep being vigilant in Illinois, recognizing that the different departments are, for lack of better ways of saying this, we'll say they're doing their best to try to figure out a very challenging situation. The regulations and rules that came out in Illinois were less than ideal for implementation. For the equity operators that have been impacted. But at the same time, look, the promise is there. And so let's figure out, how do we make this promise come through? How do we figure out how to support these craft growers so that they aren't simply a year later a memory? Or, okay, great, we get the next round or the third round or the fourth round right, but those first couple rounds have put a lot of generational money into the application process and securing real estate and so on and so forth, are not simply left behind as casualties of this whole standing up cannabis in such a way that we're talking about billions of dollars in that state have flowed through the coffers in the last couple of years. We need to see better. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on it. Kay, I know you're out there in Chicago. Kind of a good segue into the conversation with you. So anything that you have to add to that story, anything you're aware of or hearing from either the craft growers or the city or the state?
I have a lot of thoughts and opinions and feelings about everything that's happening here in Illinois, but I'll save those for a later conversation. I think you already hit on a lot of key points. We're starting to see some light. We have some dispensaries, some storefronts that are starting to open under that program, and news of some of the grows that are going to be in operation soon, and even some products that are coming out, which is exciting, that are coming from the craft grow space. So I'll keep it positive, but I also think that, just like you said, we need to keep pushing harder here. If you're in the industry, and there's ways where you can get involved with legislation and advocacy, and just making sure that there's bills and programs out there that makes sense when they roll them out. And you can do this, and you don't have to be out there lobbying in Springfield, or there's groups that are doing that for us, but you can do as little as making a phone call or a text message or sending out an email to your state senator or state rep. That all makes a difference. So I just want to advocate and push for that kind of action towards
Awesome.
everything that's going on here.
I appreciate that. Just to throw it out here too, another plug towards some of these groups such as Cannabis Equity Illinois Coalition, Chicago Normal. These are groups that have been doing this work for several years. And so even if you can't go down to Springfield yourself, you go ahead and make those calls and also see what's up with these organizations. A lot of them could use volunteer support. A lot of them could use help getting the word out. A lot of them could use just small donations that add up. So these are the folks that are doing the work, making sure that the industry is rolled out equitably. So no, thanks, Kay, for those points. So before we get into the conversation with you, I do want to highlight it is Women's History Month, National Women's History Month. I'm not sure the exact title for the month. So we do highlight a few businesses here every week on the Cannabis Minority Report. So I want to just highlight a few businesses. A couple of these I might have highlighted before, but I think that it's worth noting them again because they're doing amazing work in the space. One of them is founded by somebody that will be on the show next week. Tiffany Watkins will be on the show next week. Her company, Vanguard Media, based out in Seattle, is a cannabis lifestyle magazine that celebrates women and focuses on closing the gap between the sexes in the cannabis industry. So Tiffany is the vice chair of our DEI committee. She's an amazing leader in the space, very well respected for a lot of good reasons. And so definitely check out Vanguard Media and the work that they're doing. Another company to note is the Mary Jane Consulting Group in New York City, a boutique consulting firm with a specialization in the cannabis, CBD, and hemp industries. The company's website explains, our mission is to provide equitable, diverse, and inclusive consultation services in the cannabis industry. Services include business plan and license application reviews, compliance assessments, and more. This was founded by Michelle Fields. I've had the pleasure of working with Michelle on the New York Cannabis Social Equity Roundtable that we host at the NCIA. And Michelle has been one of our really strong leaders in that group, providing lots of great insights and knowledge and legal expertise as we put our rules recommendations together for the state of New York to help make that a more equitable rollout. So Michelle, really appreciate all the work that you're doing, Mary Jane Consulting Group, and all the different advocacy that you're doing out there in the community and working with companies and small businesses to help support them. Another business I want to highlight, and I know you know this woman, Naomi Granger. Naomi is the vice chair of our Banking Financial Services Committee, NACAT Pros, National Association of Cannabis Accounting and Tax Professionals. It's definitely a good, a long name, but for a good reason, because it encompasses a really important topic in our industry. You can, anybody in this industry, and if you're new to the industry, you're trying to figure this out, make sure you get yourself in contact with either Naomi's group or others like this. Naomi's group is amazing because you can go to Naomi's group and she will help pair you or help find you tax professionals and accounting professionals that are versed in cannabis specifically. You can't just go to your regular accountant, as you've probably found out by now. And you also don't want to find somebody that's just kind of winging it. You want to find somebody that's plugged in to associations, to groups. Naomi's group is a great group because they provide a lot of education and training specifically on cannabis. So I just want to highlight these three women today because I think that they're doing amazing work in the space, and it's National Women's History Month, so let's make sure we stay on point. All right, so with all that said, Kay, really appreciate you being here today. Really excited for this conversation. We've known each other for a few years now. It predates my time at NCIA. We met at Pilsen Fest. It was for those of you who don't know, Chicago has during the summer, like every single week, there's multiple festivals going on all over the city. Every neighborhood has its own festival. I think every culture has its own festival. They intersect a lot. Pilsen Fest was one that we went to a few years back, and I was walking through the festival, and I was there with my lady who's from Chicago. I was there with my business partner who's from Chicago, a couple other folks too. And we're walking through and we see this booth, and it was cannabis specific, right? But it wasn't the cannabis that attracted me, because you see a lot of booths that are cannabis specific and they actually don't attract me too much because it's just like the same old thing. But this was a few years back, and Hush was already really, I think, taking things to another level. The booth just was very inviting. There was something about it that was very professional and stylish. You guys were selling, I think, jewelry and hats and things of that nature. And I thought it was a really interesting approach to cannabis. And so, we ended up, talking. And then, of course, you guys, it turned out we're throwing events. And so we went to some of your events. And I was like, all right, Hush is amazing. What can I do to support? How can I be, of help to this or to this, what you all are doing? Because I really believed in the mission of Hush. So, it's been great to get to know you over the last few years and see the growth of Hush, the growth of you personally, the growth of your business partner Vanessa. The two of you are really amazing and strong leaders, and I love you all. So, with that all said, Kay, welcome to the show. Anything else that you want to say about yourself, of course, feel free over this next conversation. But the first question I'm going to ask you before we jump into anything cannabis specific is to actually back it out of cannabis for a second, because something that I want to make sure that we definitely get to today, and that I would probably forget if we just started talking about all the cannabis stuff, is that you've been a member of the Albany Park Chamber of Commerce, which is a chamber of commerce in the neighborhood in Chicago that you grew up in, I believe. But you now sit on the board as the vice president of economic development for the North River Commission in Chicago. So that's a whole lot of words that I didn't understand until you broke it down for me recently. But could you tell us about what that is and what it means and why that's so important to you, and really for Chicago, I think. So yeah, tell us about your experience with the North River Park Commission.
Yeah, so Albany Park is a culturally rich neighborhood in the northwest side of Chicago. It boasts of having the most diverse population within a zip code in the country. So it hosts a lot of immigrant families from different parts of the world. And I was raised in this neighborhood. My family and I migrated here in, oh my God, 30 years ago. That was the neighborhood that we first moved into. And so as it was, it's comprised of working class families and family owned businesses. So as I was growing up, I told myself that no matter where I end up, Albany Park is home. I would always come back and give back to my community. And, when I was younger, I didn't know how. So after moving out of home and living in different neighborhoods in Chicago, and starting multiple businesses, being an entrepreneur, I ended up back here in the neighborhood, full circle in 2019. In 2020, actually during the pandemic, I became more involved in community meetings virtually, and that led me to get to know the North River Commission, which is essentially a delegate agency of the city of Chicago, which services Albany Park and a big chunk of the northwest side of the city. And so I got a little bit more involved. And in 2022, I was invited to join the board. And in January of this year, I was appointed VP of Economic Development. It was just full circle for me career-wise, personally as well. It's significant because it aligns so well with everything that I've been doing in the last 2 decades, and everything that I'm doing now to enrich communities, with a focus on revitalizing commercial areas and working with business owners, especially businesses that are owned by immigrants and people of color, which essentially small businesses drive the economy. And so it's a new role for me. It's only been a few months, but I look forward to what I can contribute and learn from for the rest of this year. So that's what that is.
No, I appreciate you sharing that with us. Big congratulations. I know you told me a few months ago. I wasn't stunned, but I was like, wow, this is amazing because, so all the reasons you just said, right? I mean, small businesses are the backbone of this country in so many ways. And it's so important that, especially, immigrants that come to this country that start small businesses really drive a lot of the innovation in this country too. Even a lot of the big corporations, a lot of the big corporations and the startups take a lot of their inspiration from the small businesses and especially the small business immigrant community that brings different innovations from different cultures into this country. And so I think it's so important that a commission like this has representation from the community, somebody like yourself that understands what it means to be in that neighborhood. I actually know that I'm pretty familiar with the neighborhood myself because my lady, Sandy, she also grew up in that neighborhood. And so and actually when we first started seeing each other about 10 years ago, I lived in that neighborhood for a little bit too. So I've gotten to see and hear a lot of the stories about Albany Park and how important it is to really the fabric of Chicago in a lot of ways that you might not even realize. And then to your point, it filters out, to other parts of it has a greater impact than just its own simple neighborhood. So with all that said, one of the things that I think stood out too was, going into that new space that you're in, the delegation, like you said, it's a delegate, commission. Um, that process and becoming this VP of economic development, what was that like for you? Like, how was that process? I mean, because was it surreal? Like, was it nerve wracking? Like, was it overly scrutinizing? How was the process for you?
It was very surreal. It wasn't planned for me. It wasn't like I didn't enter into the community meetings thinking, okay, I'm gonna be, in this position or even join the board. I really just wanted to learn more about who is organizing the community, who is making efforts to beautify the community, because it was something that was long needed, but I saw wasn't really being done until during that time. And then, for me, it was great timing as well because it was during the pandemic. I had a lot more time on my hands. And then all the meetings being held virtually gave me access to all of them, really. So what I did was just, let me go into all these community meetings, let me see what's going on, like in my neck of the woods, and you know my immediate community, and see how I can contribute. And so I got more involved. I first got involved in the arts and culture committee, and then started getting more curious about housing and then economic development. And so, I got to know more about what the commission, what this agency was doing. And then, also decided, okay, this is a great time for me to be more involved, whether that was volunteering my services or, providing a services complementary to people within the area, because I know it's what's needed. I grew up in the area. There were resources I didn't know were available to me and my family. And so when they approached me to join the board, I wasn't thinking about it. It was just like, oh, okay, sure, right? And so I filled out the application. And then during the application process, that also gave me insight on, okay, this is how I can contribute to my community. I do have these assets and skills and lived experiences to be able to service this community. And then very rapidly, they asked me to be vice president of economic development, and then I had to be like, what does that mean? I really had like no idea. And it's a board position. It's also a voluntary position, but it's a very significant position because it crosses over into the other committees like education, housing, arts and culture. Everything is about economic development. It was For me, it was a little bit, I considered it. I was like, they gave me the call. I said, give me some time to think about it. I want to really, figure out if this is something I want to do. And when I did, it just, I realized, I was like, yes, this is something that I want to be doing. This is something I've been wanting to do. I just didn't have the name or title attached to it. But essentially it's what was like aching in my heart, and that I want to get back to my roots and the culture, and serve people like me. Um, and so
Yeah,
it was,
absolutely.
mhm.
No, it's inspiring, right? And I think that that's the real takeaway I have here is that for any of us that are out there that are trying to figure this out, and I mean, you're when we talk about the different, identities, right, and the intersectionalities of identities and stuff, you're identifying as an immigrant woman of color, right, that grew up in the city in Chicago, and here you are now on this advisory board, right, on this commission, and I think that's something that everybody can really learn from is that look, like the opportunities are out there now, right? Things are shifting. We're noticing a shift in things over the last several years. I think in certain places, it doesn't mean there's not a ton of work to do. It doesn't mean there's lots of still barriers in place. But as we start to shift, as things start to change, these are the opportunities that exist, and people are starting to notice different types of experience. I saw something the other day in I think it was Fortune Mag that companies are looking to hire more folks without degrees this year and beyond potentially too, because they're starting to realize that the same traditional metrics that we used before aren't really serving us. And so, with the economic development, like you said, you didn't necessarily know that was the trajectory you were on in some ways, but it is absolutely the trajectory you've been on as somebody that's come in and been an entrepreneur for now 20 years or so, 15, 20 years, something along those lines, working in all these different capacities and figuring that stuff out. So that's a good segue into my next question I want to talk about here is, a Hush. So Hush specifically, because this is another aspect of it too that we kind of didn't even touch on at all right now, is that you've been asked to take on this role as somebody who is in the cannabis space that is still not accepted in a lot of different places in this country, is still not federally legal. But that was obviously totally fine for these folks to say, hey, let's come on in and let's figure this out together. And providing a board seat even. So with that said, Hush, started out a few years back as an events company, doing cannabis events. Can you tell us a little about kind of like what the process has been like for you, what the journey has been like, the way that it started to where it is now? I know you guys just did your big Hush House event in Vegas last year. So yeah, tell us about what's going on with Hush. How did Hush come to be? Like, people don't necessarily know what Hush is. Tell us about it.
Sure. I mean, when we first started Hush, the goal was to always create higher standards, whether that's within yourself as an individual, as an entrepreneur, or a brand in a space. And what perfect place and space to do it in than the cannabis industry, which was, new, emerging at the time, and also just encompassed so many different kinds of people, right? From all walks of life. And so we wanted to create a brand that really embodied that, and that in whatever we did, we were advocating for a plant that was so stigmatized. So we need to carry ourselves differently. We need to have a different mindset. And how do we do that? And so, when me and my business partner, Vanessa, got together with our skills combined in hospitality, event production, marketing, creative side, we figured an event is a great way to showcase what that could look like in the space. And so, we started out with producing events, hosting events that focus on cannabis, but it was a professional production. It was marketed differently as well. When we rolled out our marketing in the beginning, it was a lot of cryptic messaging, but it involved mindset and personal development. And so people never really saw that aligned with a cannabis brand. And so there was a lot of intrigue into what this was. And so we wanted to create that. We wanted to create that mystery of like, what is this? Is it events? Is it marketing? Is it a lifestyle brand? But we just really wanted to grab people's attention into it's all of that. But the real goal is let's together create an ecosystem of people who are creating higher standards within this industry. And so it's evolved into now, which was also always the goal, is to be an agency that provides event production, marketing, brand development, business development, and all in one to help other brands and businesses and entrepreneurs with resources that they might not have always access to, and a platform for them to showcase their brands. And so we've been able to
And a fun platform, by the way. So just throwing that out there is that these events are very fun. They're very exciting to attend. They're always interesting. And I know I cut you off there, but I wanted to just throw that out there because it's so key. We're not talking about events that are dry and boring and just the same old, same old. You guys had a wedding at your event, not at your last event, at your event in Vegas. You actually had a wedding on site. Can you tell us about that wedding and kind of how that came to be?
Yeah. So all kinds of things can happen at a Hush event. What stays at Hush also, what happens at Hush also stays at Hush.
Sorry, I guess I'm blowing it up.
No, that's so we had, there was a couple who a client of ours actually, and then someone who we worked with here in Chicago, who met at, or who reunited at one of our 420 event of last year, actually. And they rekindled a fire that maybe was one started like I think a decade ago. And so they're in different times in their lives. And so at our 420 event, they rekindled that fire, they reunited, and then fell in love. And so between 420 of last year to us planning our Vegas event, they dated, they became committed in a relationship, and then all of a sudden we're seeing the guy send us photos of an engagement ring, asking her to get married. So we were kind of involved in the whole process from start to beginning. And then, they heard about us planning a Vegas event. They had decided that they're going to go get married in Las Vegas on that same day and then just celebrate at our Hush event. And so Vanessa and I, we approached them. We were just like, why not just get married at Hush and make it full circle? And so and plus in true Vegas fashion, like just have this, pop-up wedding at our event. And so we created that space for them. We made it happen. It was a short ceremony, but we're so honored and so happy for them and that we're a part of this love story.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Hush, right, these events is that every time it's something amazing. I mean, I'll share the things that aren't that are shareable, right? You guys had a hip hop cellist one year. I think that was the year that I attended. I actually attended for my own birthday. And it was an amazing event, right? You have samba dancers, and there's like ice sculptures. There's functional ice sculptures. I remember that you could actually partake out of, right? I mean, just the roundedness, well-roundedness of the events, and just the surprise factor. When the wedding happened, I was there, and I think I was standing next to you, Vanessa. And I was like, wait, I didn't realize what was happening. You're like, yeah, it's a wedding. I was like, no, this isn't real. This isn't happening, because you're also like in this amazing party situation. You have cannellini being served in the background. There's all these different things happening. And so it was just very surreal. So I'm looking forward to whatever the next big event you guys are going to do is going to be. What is the next? Do you guys know the next big event you're talking about? Are you talking about Vegas again? Are you talking about some other things? Are you allowed to tell us yet? Like, because I know it's all hush, right?
It is all hush at the moment. We have yet to make an announcement, but we will do something big soon within the year. So just keep on the lookout and then sign up for our newsletter. Sign up for the Hush Club. And that said, I want to give a quick shout out to Cannellini too, because they were our partner for the Hush House event in Las Vegas, and we couldn't have done a lot of the things, and build relationships out in Las Vegas if it wasn't for Kenny, Kenny especially. So shout out to Kenny at Cannellini, so and Chris and the group. So
Awesome. Yeah, and Kenny, who is now actually one of the brand new members of our DEI committee at NCIA. So things are just kind of flowing full circle. The family's growing. It's awesome. So, and I believe the Hush is a big part of that in creating a lot of space for the cannabis culture to come together and be able to have an authentic space to feel safe in and comfortable in, and and just be able to partake together. So, that said, on the committee side of things, all right, I got a note here I wanted to state. So you are the new chair of the State Regulations Committee. And that's a committee that, generally speaking, is been, a lot of lawyers basically on that committee. Now, you're not a lawyer, but you are the chair of the committee. So, tell us about kind of what the experience has been like to become to be on it, to serve on this committee, why it's important to you, and, if is there anything that we can expect coming down the pipeline from the State Regs Committee this year?
Yeah, so it's in the same way that I became VP of Economic Development within the NRC. It's also surreal to be, the chair of the State Regulations Committee. Again, something not planned, but I think makes sense now. So I was in the committee last term and really just sat back and learned, even as just a member of the committee, I was like, what am I doing here? Because it is a room full of lawyers and, people who were more directly involved with the law and legislations and regulations. And I wasn't. I was, one of the few that wasn't. And so, but still, in 2020, I also joined the Cannabis Equity Illinois Coalition here, like you mentioned earlier, this group that does great work and advocacy and lobbying, and whose goal is to really, help pass bills in Illinois that makes sense. Vanessa and I joined because being in marketing and being in event production, just being in the industry in general, it's just we saw how important and how valuable it is to be in touch with the regulations, be a part of the legislation making process, whether that's just attending a meeting or, providing a public comment or an opinion, right? From a consumer standpoint, from a patient standpoint, which is a lot of the gaps that are missing. And so, really, I had to focus on social consumption because it was important to me from a consumer and patient standpoint. to reduce harm, for public safety, for education, and that was a gap I wanted to really help fill. And so I got more involved by just asking questions, just showing up every month, which not everybody was able to do. It's just, and sitting back and listening, and then realizing, okay, there is an actual need for leadership within the group. And
And for your perspective, I would say, for everything you just described, the perspective of folks that are in the industry, that are, operating with the patients, that are working with local advocacy groups like CEIC, and I love these guys. Like I'll always shout them out because they're amazing people. They're doing the real serious work. But you got your event last year, your 420 event was actually a fundraiser for CEIC, if I'm not mistaken,
yep,
right? Yeah,
yep, it
absolutely.
was. Yep.
Yeah. So I'm cutting you off, I guess, because one, I'm getting the note that we are starting to wind down on time. I don't know where it flew, but also because I do want to point that out is that it's we often, and this goes out to again everybody here, right? I think one of the most biggest takeaways that I'm hearing from your conversation with you here today is that if folks aren't getting this grain themselves, I'm going to throw it out there and spell it out. Is look, like, get involved in whatever capacity that means. We often have been shut out of rooms, right? We're told that we don't have the right degree, we don't have the right background, we don't have the right skin tone, whatever it may be, right? The gender, whatever it is, right? All these different check boxes that we don't have, right? But at the end of the day, one, that's why it's so important to be in these rooms, because we need these different perspectives, not extra, but these different vital perspectives in there. And I believe that right now, especially in the cannabis industry, but also I think the climate of our country, this is the time. People are a little bit more open now to, at least they might not be more open to, say, throw money towards things, right, as we're seeing in these different states, but they are more open to listening a little bit more. They are more open to including people a little bit more in these conversations, and to take advantage of that. The more soldiers that we have out there, and I don't mean like soldiers in a takeover type way, I just mean the more people that we have, the more representation we have in these different spaces, the better outcome I believe we're going to have. And that's what I'm really hearing from what you're saying is that, yeah, you would think state regs committee, it's all lawyers. Well, actually, that's the reason why it's important to have a different perspective, right? I get those kinds of conversations all the time at the NCA with folks saying, hey, does it make sense for me to be a part of this? It's like, absolutely, right? Especially when we do panels and stuff. People are like, well, I don't know what I'll have to say. You have the perspective, actually, that's probably the most important, that's harder to find than the other three panelists that we might have on something that, no offense to the lawyers at all, but there are other lawyers out there. But it's very few and far between that we find somebody that's been able to, get a social equity license in a state and become either close to or even operational, right? So, I don't mean you specifically in that way. I mean, anybody watching, anybody listening to this, recognize that your place is very important in this industry, and there are opportunities to get involved in ways that maybe aren't going to take all of your time away from you. So that's just my little pitch for advocacy and the importance of it right now. Never thought I'd be in the seat saying this kind of stuff, because I really turned my back on it for many years after growing up in San Francisco and seeing how it just didn't work for the most part. But I've warmed up to it in our industry now, and kind of the climate being changed. So anyway, that was my long-winded way of saying that. The last thing I do want to ask you about before we take our break here and then come back with our game, because I know that the game is going to be awesome today, because it's always fun. Vince throws some great questions out there. Vince, quick shout out to Vince Chandler, our producer of the show for the last 4 seasons now on the Cannabis Minority Report. Without Vince, quite simply wouldn't have a show. So Vince, thank you so much for doing everything you do in the background to make this happen. That said, all right. So last week we talked about systemic diversity. I don't know if you got to see the show with, we had Ben Larson here, CEO of Virtuosa, on. We had a great conversation. Ben brought up this term systemic diversity, which is, we talk about systemic racism, but we need to start talking about systemic diversity and how to create that, and what it really means. So with that said, Hush's events and your staff are extremely diverse. It's very noticeable. People notice it when we go to the events. We notice that everybody feels comfortable. And when I say everybody, I mean everybody. It's all different creeds, religions, races, size, everything, right? Everybody's there. And so how do you guys achieve that? Is it some systemic diversity type thing again we're talking about here? I'm guessing so, even if we haven't defined what that is. But how do you guys achieve the diversity at Hush events?
Yeah, both Vanessa and I come from immigrant families, and we've lived in underserved communities here in Chicago. That's something that a lot of people don't know. They make an assumption that we come from, well-off families, right? But no, our family struggled as well. We come from a long line of immigrants who have paved the way for us to do what we're doing now. And so, working with people of color and people like us is always at the top of our minds, and it's very important to us. When we founded Hush, the first people in mind were people like us, whether that was serving people like us or working with people like us. And our goal was to always serve, people of color and minorities who lacked access to the resources that we could now provide and have built in the last, 15, 20 years individually and collectively, and provide a platform for minorities to thrive in. So I think because we're mindful from the very beginning of who we're serving and who we want to give a platform to, who we want to put a spotlight on, we also attract other people of color who want to support the same cause and community, and are therefore we're able to build an ecosystem of like-minded people. So our guests, we attract people of color from all walks of life who, they come to our events, and then they see how fun it is, they see how immersive and different it is, but they also see people like them who are just enjoying themselves and who they can be themselves in, their authentic selves in. Sometimes, we're put in spaces where we had to constantly assimilate, right, and be a chameleon to different types of people. But then we wanted to create an atmosphere and an environment and a work culture that allows you to live your truth and live authentically, right? And so I think that's how
Awesome.
able to do that.
That's awesome. And, some threads there, right, Vince? Last week, Ben also brought the word chameleon up, actually, interestingly enough, right? So 2 weeks in a row now, we've heard the word chameleon come up. And the other thing that was, I think, also a common thread was the intent from the beginning. And it wasn't just some intention that was kind of on the side, but it was a core tenet, a core belief, a core intention that you then carried out and executed on. And so I think that for everybody out there listening, even if you are, a diverse company from Jump Street, you think about how are you going to create a diverse ecosystem as you move forward, because sometimes it's easy to fall into the trap of not having a diverse ecosystem, even when you have a diverse team, but you have to have that intention, and we have to create that systemic diversity together. So I think we're trying at the NCAA to do that kind of stuff. It's worked through, with leaders like yourself, like Ben, like all the other folks we've had on the show this season already. Khadijah Adams, shout out to Khadijah getting things rolling the last couple of seasons. To hear Johnson the year before that in the first season of the CMR, it was actually called something different back then, I think. But anyway, the point is that the systemic diversity. I'm really kind of liking this term, and we need to create systemic equity. And I think that systemic diversity will help with creation of systemic equity, because at the end of the day, diversity doesn't mean nothing. It means nothing if we don't really have the equity at the end of the day as the main goal. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break here. We're going to be right back with Canna Quiz, some questions for you, Kay, and then we'll wrap things up. So let's take it away, Vince.
Well, here at the National Cannabis Industry Association, we have proudly represented small businesses across the cannabis industry since 2010. We represent Main Street cannabis, not Wall Street cannabis. We have come so far in this fight to legalize cannabis that it seems that it's almost inevitable, and we're the ones making sure that as those rules are written, they favor small businesses, mom and pop operators, and Main Street cannabis, not Wall Street cannabis. In addition to making sure that your voice is heard at the federal level, being a member of NCIA also means building a vibrant community of small business owners within the cannabis space. Because we can always learn so much better by working together, learning from our mistakes and our successes, and building this industry together. So if you're interested in making sure that small businesses and Main Street cannabis has a seat at the table, be sure to join NCIA at thecannabisindustry.org.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here with us on the Cannabis Minority Report, not just today, but every week. I'm really excited to be running this show out here with Vince, with all the great guests we have. We're going to be rolling out some co-hosts starting on the 27th of March. So you'll have me and somebody else as the host. So you won't be just stuck with my take on things, but you'll get somebody else's take on things too, as well as our guests. So with that said, Kay, this is now time for Canna Quiz. And Vince, we still have to, let's go back through and find who it was that said Canna Quiz. I keep saying this every week, and I want to make sure that intent becomes real. So let's make sure. Yeah, I see Vince writing that down right now. So let's make sure we figure that out and give a shout out to the person that coined that phrase. So ad break. No, that's my note. I'm discombobulated. So, all right, Canna Quiz. So yeah, that won't be your quiz topic. Question number one. It's going to be a multiple choice question, and I'll ask you the question here now. So it can be hard for patients to find the correct medical dispensary to work with. Navigating apps, websites, friends' reviews, and advertising can confuse the process, as we all know, right? The internet has made things better in some ways, very challenging in others. But one state goes a little bit above and beyond, so to speak. Which state does not share its list of licensed dispensaries with anyone except for registered medical marijuana patients? So which state does not share its list of licensed dispensaries with anyone but registered medical marijuana patients? Is it Arizona, Arkansas, Alaska, or Maine?
Ooh.
Arizona, Arkansas, Alaska, or Maine?
Interesting. I don't know this one, but I'm gonna go with C, Alaska.
Well, the answer is Arizona. If you aren't a registered patient and you want to learn about licensed dispensaries in Arizona, you'll have your work cut out for you if you are not a registered patient. Only registered patients can access the full list of licensees. So Arizona, no idea I'm guessing it has to do with, protection, because on the flip side of that, in California, at one point they were listing everybody that had a license. And guess what that was? A list of who to go rob by people that were basically knocking these stores off with armed robberies and stuff. So, you take some, you lose some, right? Some win, some loss, right? Yeah. Okay, so this is your chance to redeem yourself. Overregulation in the cannabis space is often a way to hide another sin tax on our industry, otherwise known as excise taxes, right? License fees are a well-known way to add costs to creating a business, but one state really piles them on by including annual fee renewals, additional annual fee renewals, updating simple information like addresses, location, or name changes, similar to like statement of information type stuff. So which state is known for which state is known for picking the pockets for any business decision? Is it Oklahoma, Florida, Arizona, or Delaware? Which state is going to get involved and make sure that they're going to put in the fee renewals and fees for every time you want to update anything? Is it Oklahoma, Florida, Arizona, or Delaware?
Ooh, let's go with again, I'm gonna say I don't know this one, but I'm gonna go with Florida.
So Florida gets picked on a lot here, and it's often been not the answer. But we're actually picking on a different state today, because once a business obtains a license in this state, they're not just subject to annual renewal fees. They have to pay a hefty fee anytime they want to change their address, location, or name. The state is, again, Arizona. So that's who we're picking on today.
No, Arizona.
So thank you, Vince. Yeah, way to go, Arizona. And just to be fair to Arizona, every single state that has cannabis laws, it has ridiculous laws like this that really just keep picking the pockets of all the operators out there. At the end of the day, we need more reform. We need people to understand the cannabis industry is not going to be able to compete in I don't want to say against the legacy space, right? Because you guys know my opinion on that. But I want to say it's not going to be able to stand up properly and incorporate the legacy space and the legacy consumers properly if it doesn't get better tax reform going. And these couple of things here are an example of that, right? So Arizona, like many other states, please consider doing a better job when it comes to taxes. Kay, any last thoughts here before we head out for our listeners?
Yeah, my last thought is that I just realized we don't have a delegate in our state regulations committee from Arizona. So we have to go.
Absolutely. I'm pretty sure we do have some Arizona representatives in some of our other committees, so we'll have to find where they are and who they are and connect you with them. So, Kay, really appreciate this conversation.
Yeah.
I think there's so many gems here, so many things that I think that people can really be inspired by. You have a great story, and it's not just a story, it's an actual life experience and a journey that you've been living. You, your business partner, those that you come into contact with and affected over the years, including folks that got married at your event after rekindling their relationship at your event. So really amazing work that you're doing. Really appreciate you. With that said, I'm going to say I wish everybody a wonderful week whenever you're listening to this. I hope your week is great. I hope your day is great. I hope everything is awesome. I know that it's challenging times out there in so many ways, and challenges are just that. They're just challenges that we have to figure out how to overcome. Everybody that's facing a challenge right now, you've faced a lot of challenges before in order to get to this point in the first place. So keep recognizing that the more you tap in to communities, to groups, to family, to friends, to ecosystems that support you, that's the way we get through these challenges together. So keep going at it, keep plugging in, say what's up to us, and look forward to seeing everybody next week. In the meantime, Kay, thank you so much, and we'll be seeing you soon. Bye, everybody.
The Cannabis Minority Report is a production of the National Cannabis Industry Association. Hosted by Mike Lomuto, directed by Vince Chandler. Our producers are Bethany Moore and Aaron Smith, and our executive producers are Vince Chandler and Mike Lomuto.